An American family finds themselves in a country consumed by chaos, where the government is collapsing right before their eyes. To survive, they will have to face sheer terror, brutal violence, and a desperate struggle for salvation. This is the movie No Escape. At the countryside residence of a Southeast Asian prime minister, a high-profile meeting concludes between the head of state and a representative of a major water company. As the talks finish, a bodyguard escorts the guest to his car. Suddenly, the sharp echo of a gunshot rings out. The guard rushes back to his superior, only to find the horrific truth. Insurgents have assassinated the prime minister. Knowing the brutal nature of the local rebels, the bodyguard takes his own life on the spot. Just hours before these tragic events, Jack and Annie Dwyer, along with their 2 young daughters, are on a flight to this very country. Jack is an engineer, sent here by the water company to rebuild the city's failing water supply system. But upon landing at the airport, the family is left stranded. No one is there to meet them or take them to their hotel. That is when a charismatic stranger from their flight, who introduces himself as Hammond, offers a helping hand, explaining that his friend is about to pick him up. The family accepts, and soon they are riding in Kenny's car. On their way to the hotel, they notice heavily armed soldiers in the streets, sending a wave of anxiety through the family. After checking into their room, Jack is surprised to find that the TV isn't working. At the front desk, he is told that the entire city has lost television and internet service. In the middle of the night, Jack is startled awake by the distant sound of an explosion. He finds Annie in tears, overwhelmed by the harsh reality of the country they just moved to for the sake of his career. Completely cut off from the outside world, Jack decides to head to a local market the next morning to buy a newspaper and find out what is happening. After buying a paper, only to discover it is 2 days old, Jack suddenly finds himself trapped right between a line of riot police and a furious, armed mob. In an instant, the world around him erupts into horrific violence. The roar of automatic gunfire, frantic screams, and the flash of Molotov cocktails tear the street apart. Driven by pure instinct, Jack dives between the market stalls, slips through a narrow alley, and runs as far away from the carnage as possible. He wanders into a labyrinth of unfamiliar streets, all swallowed by the same madness. Keeping to the shadows and avoiding the armed rioters, Jack finally makes his way back to the perimeter of their hotel. But right on the approach to the hotel, he freezes in his tracks, staring at the lifeless bodies scattered across the sidewalk. Right at the entrance, he witnesses a horrifying sight. A Westerner is executed right in front of a cheering mob. Before he can even process the horror, the crowd spots him, and in the next split second, they charge. Jack scrambles up a fire escape, breaking the ladder behind him to cut off the pursuit, and slips inside the building. But almost simultaneously, the armed mob breaches the hotel doors. Jack manages to dive into an elevator, race up to his floor, and burst into his room, shocking his wife with the news of the absolute chaos outside. But the panic deepens when Annie realizes their daughter Lucy is missing. Brieg tells them her sister went down to the pool. Once again, Jack has to sprint through the crumbling safety of the corridors. The sound of gunshots, desperate screams, and heavy approaching footsteps force him to move faster. Reaching the ground floor, he finally finds his daughter, but the attackers spot them and immediately give chase. Meanwhile, back in the room, Annie hears a violent struggle through the wall and realizes their neighbor has just been murdered. Knowing they are next, she throws her entire weight against the door, desperately blocking the killers from breaking in. Down below, Jack is still running for his life when Hammond suddenly appears. With cold calculation, Hammond guns down one of the attackers and points Jack toward the roof. Jack manages to get back to the room, convinces his terrified wife to open the door, and the family scrambles up the stairs under heavy gunfire. Despite the lethal danger, they make it to the top of the building, joining a group of trapped foreigners and hotel staff. There, in a moment of temporary safety, Jack learns the brutal truth. The mob surrounding the building consists of rebels who overthrew the government, furious that their country's water resources were handed over to an American corporation. Suddenly, the roar of helicopter blades echoes nearby, and for a split second, hope sparks in the crowd. But Jack instantly realizes the truth. It is the enemy. He manages to drag his family away from the line of fire, just as a barrage of automatic gunfire mows down those who, only a moment ago, believed they were being rescued. Consumed by their bloody work, the insurgents lose control of the helicopter, sending the chopper crashing down. Moments later, armed men breach the roof. Realizing there is no other way out, Jack tells his wife they must leap across to the neighboring building so he can throw the children to her. Terror paralyzes Annie, but knowing this is their only chance for survival, she gathers her courage and takes the desperate leap. Jack manages to toss their youngest daughter across to the safety of the next roof, but Lucy resists so fiercely that it nearly ends in tragedy. Jack is forced to tie her hands. With a monumental effort, he flings the girl toward her mother, then, conquering his own fear, jumps after them. But the rooftop door of the new building is locked, forcing them to climb down the outside facade to the floor below. Spotting an arriving tank, they slip into an office space just as a massive blast shakes the building. Realizing they cannot escape unnoticed, Jack hides his family under the rubble, blocking the entrance with the body of a fallen soldier. Soon after, the rebels enter, systematically executing everyone in their path. Once the massacre is over, the insurgents leave the building. Waiting until nightfall, the family cautiously emerges from their hiding place, hoping to reach the U.S. Embassy. Annie manages to find a city map, while Jack picks up a set of keys for a moped. Below, he hears the screams of people, and walking to the window, witnesses a brutal execution. Their quiet conversation is cut short when one of the rioters returns to the room to loot the remaining goods. Catching sight of the family, the rebel begins shouting for backup. But driven mad by fear and desperation, Jack lunges at him, and for the first time in his life, kills a man. Gathering clothing from the corpses to somehow disguise their appearance, Jack heads downstairs and finds the moped. They set off, riding through the night city, which looks more and more like a war zone. After 5 blocks, they finally reach the embassy. Leaving his family outside the wall, Jack sneaks inside, but the sight of destruction and dead bodies makes him realize that no help is coming from here. At that moment, a group of rebels steps out of the building and spots Jack, but a sudden explosion delays them. Forced to run once again, the family gets lost in the narrow alleys of the unfamiliar city and ends up at a temple. The caretaker, seeing the frightened children, decides to hide the family in the bushes. The gates burst open, and the pursuers demand that the monk reveal the fugitive's location. Spreading across the temple courtyard, the rebels begin combing through the brush. Knowing they are about to be discovered, Jack decides to grab a rifle left aside by one of the insurgents. But the darkness works against him. Stepping on a dry branch, he catches the attention of a gunman. Annie realizes her husband needs help, so she steps out of the bushes, shouting to distract the attackers in hopes that Jack can disarm the man. He manages to tackle him, but his inexperience ruins the chance. He forgets to take the weapon off safety, and the gang instantly takes advantage, disarming him. Right before Jack's eyes, they decide to assault Annie, but the bandits are suddenly distracted by the arrival of a captured Hammond. He begs them not to shoot, claiming he can pay them off, but then abruptly opens fire on the gang, along with the very man who brought him in. The masked shooter turns out to be Kenny. Hammond tells the family to follow him immediately. Knowing the city's underbelly, he leads them to a brothel, where they find temporary shelter on the roof. In a conversation with his savior, Jack learns the dark truth. Hammond and Kenny are actually covert operatives, and the West, having long eyed this region, uses people like them to create conditions for the financial enslavement of poor countries. Realizing that he is partly responsible for the disaster that has befallen Jack's family, Hammond feels deeply obligated to get them out alive. Pointing toward the river, he explains that just 2 kilometers downstream lies the border with Vietnam, where they can finally find safety. That night, Jack spots Kenny and Hammond moving cautiously when a sudden gunshot shatters the silence. Their position has been compromised, and the entire group is forced to run once again. Rushing down the stairs, Kenny falls victim to the insurgents, while Hammond is wounded. He begins to lag behind significantly, and realizing he can no longer run, collapses to the ground. When Jack turns back to help him, the operative, gritting his teeth in pain, begs him not to stop and to forget about him, because saving his family is all that matters. Gathering his remaining strength, Hammond sacrifices himself so that the Americans can escape. They find themselves in a fishing village where rebels are swarming the streets, searching every single corner. Knowing that any delay is fatal, Jack decides to secure a boat and hides his family before setting out to search. He manages to find a small boat, but the owner refuses to let it go. Jack offers his shoes and watch in exchange, but before they can reach a deal, the voices of the rebels echo nearby. The fisherman hides Jack, but the arriving bandits discover him anyway. They brutally beat Jack right in front of his family, who are forced to watch from their hiding place. The rebels decide to execute Jack on the spot. At that exact moment, Lucy breaks down, runs out of hiding, and distracts the enemy. The gunshot meant for the execution hits Jack in the shoulder instead. Wanting to have some sick fun, the rebels shove a revolver into the young girl's hands and command her to shoot her own father, threatening to kill her if she refuses. Jack begs his daughter to pull the trigger, but Lucy cannot bring herself to do it. Fully distracted by the cruel game, the bandits fail to notice Annie sneaking up. With a scream, she lunges at the leader and takes him down. Jack, seizing the moment of pure chaos, grabs a weapon and eliminates the remaining rebels. Finally, the family reaches the boat and heads downstream, soon approaching the Vietnamese border. But the insurgents spot them from the shore, demanding that they turn the boat around. Despite the Vietnamese border guards ordering the boat back, Jack refuses to stop. The moment the family crosses into Vietnamese territory, the border guards aim their weapons at the pursuing rebels, declaring that opening fire will be treated as an act of war. Only when the Vietnamese guards pull them from the middle of the river does Jack finally realize that he has brought his family to safety. In the chaos of war, there are no heroes and no villains. There are only people willing to go to the absolute limit for those beside them. When every next step could be your last, it doesn't matter how much strength you have lost. All that matters is that your loved ones are still there, breathing. And perhaps, salvation is not a glorious victory, but a quiet morning that you greet together, knowing you survived what seemed impossible.